Hey all everybody, welcome to the full series spoiler edition of Dr. Candlepun's Lost podcast. Today I will be talking about season 1 episode 16 Outlaws in the context of the completed series. Um, and yeah, as always, I'm going to be talking about this episode while I play it on mute, so it'll be a commentary of sorts. That said, you do not necessarily need to watch along with me. I will do my best if I'm talking about a specific scene that's happening on screen to make it clear what it is I am referring to. That said, if you do want to watch along with me, I am pressing play now, and I'll tell you when the first image is on the screen. And here we go. We are in the recap. And yeah, I'll go ahead and comment on this particular recap real quick. For the first time, for the first time viewer discussion, I did skip past this part before everybody else arrived. That way, once we played it, it just went straight into the episode. My reason for that is because I felt like this one is particularly spoilery. So right now, what it's recapping is the situation with Jack and his dad. Um, and I almost kind of like that because it almost like misleads you into thinking, oh, this is going to be a Jack episode. And then the recap switches into Sawyer's stuff and Kate reading the letter and um, confronting him with the fact that he wrote it and that, there was an original Sawyer. Um, so which I'm kind of trying to pay attention to the subtitles here, because maybe so my issue with this is that it recaps the Sawyer situation and then it goes straight into this scene with this blonde kid and the mom waking him up and all that, and I feel like if you just came in from it recapping Sawyer's situation, then you just immediately know that you're seeing Sawyer as a kid and you kind of know what's about to happen. Um, and that was the main thing I wanted to prevent. I mean, in theory, somebody could remember that it recapped the Christian Shepherd stuff and be like, okay, well, somehow he's going to factor into this. Um, but I think that's less so my concern with that recap because I do feel like by the time Christian shows up in the flashback, like nobody's remembering that it recapped that, or I don't think anybody's like looking for him to show up. Um, I don't think. Uh, And, I was going to say something else about that. Oh, well, I was going to say, like, if somebody is thinking about Christian and him being part of the recap, like, you might end up thinking that it's just recapping that because Jack's going to bring it up somehow, like on the island or something like that. I don't think it necessarily spoils that Christian's going to show up in the bar. Um, yeah, my bigger concern was just I, I I think this scene works a little better if you're not quite sure where you're at and what's about to happen, and it maybe I think different people probably piece it together at different points, and I think some people, including one of our first time viewers, it's not until the moment here where Sawyer actually wakes up on the island that it's like, oh, that was Sawyer as a kid. Um, I think other people could maybe piece it together before that. But anyways, uh, Tina, can you stop licking? Sorry, I got a dog sitting with me and she's licking herself. I'm not sure if you guys can hear it. Hey, stop licking, goof. Um, but all right, so yeah, now we're in Sawyer's tent. Wakes up to the boar. If you're listening to this and you're at all familiar with my channel, which I would assume most people are, I mean, I don't know. Okay, so what's going on in this episode with the boar and the dreams and the whispers? Sawyer is really being haunted by this uh, thing that he did before he got on the plane, and he's being haunted in all these different ways, like these three different ways. Um, it would be one thing if it was just the boar, and then it's like, okay, yeah, maybe it's just this boar being weird. Maybe it's kind of like Kate said, and he's got the scent of the clone. He doesn't like it. But then you add in the whispers, in those last words, you add in the fact that Sawyer's having these nightmares, which seem to be, it doesn't seem to be something that he's been experiencing like consistently until recently. Um, so yeah, what do I think is going on there? I mean, again, if you're familiar with my channel, you'll know I think that the Man in Black is 100% behind all of it. Um, as you know, I've yet to do my video essay on the dreams, but I think my reasons for believing that the Man in Black is behind the dreams is overall pretty clear. The point of that video essay will be to illustrate why it makes sense in each case of the on-screen dreams that we see. Um, why it makes sense for the Man in Black to be projecting that dream or constructing that dream. Struggling with words again. Um, why it makes sense for him to be doing that at the time that he does it, and what I think he was hoping to get out of it, and what I think in some cases he actually did get out of it. Um, anyways, so yeah, I haven't done the dream video essay yet, but I think the vast majority of people that are familiar with the entirety of this show would agree with me that the Man in Black is responsible for at least some of the dreams. I know I'm a broken record when the dreams come up, but yeah, like the Horace Goodspeed dream in season 4, Horace Goodspeed leading John to the cabin where Christian, aka the Man in Black, is waiting to tell Locke what he needs to do, or what the Man in Black wants him to do. And then in just a couple episodes, Deus Ex Machina will be talking about, or I'll be talking about the dream that leads them to the Beechcraft, and I've already talked about it a fair amount in other places. Um, anyways, so my point is that it does seem clear that the Man in Black can do that. Like he is immensely powerful in his psychic abilities, and yeah, therefore it follows that this would be a capability that he has, and yeah, I think it's not really debatable that he has that ability. Um, so you have that. Then, if you're at all familiar with my whispers theory and interpretation, if not, I'll link that in the description. But I I have all kinds of reasons for not agreeing with the surface level explanation we're given in the show, for why. In the show, we're pretty explicitly told in that final season, or rather, Hurley is pretty explicitly told by Michael that the whispers are essentially spirits that can't move on for whatever reasons. Um, Michael says he himself can't move on because of, quote, what he did, and presumably he's referring to Anna Lucia and Libby. Um. Anyways, I mean, in that whole video essay, I go into all of my issues with that explanation and how it's presented. And so yeah, I'm trying to resist the urge of going into all of them here. Just a couple of big ones is, Michael shows up trying to warn Hurley that if they proceed the way that they're going, it will lead to people getting killed. So instead, Michael points Hurley to the Man in Black's camp, which in turn leads to multiple people getting killed. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense that if Michael has this uh, foresight to know that doing this thing is going to lead to people dying, he should also know that leading people to the Man in Black. In fact, it's much more obvious that leading people to the Man in Black will lead to people getting killed, and indeed it does. But also just it muddles the nature of the Flash sideways, and if the whole point of that realm, if you will, or that state of existence, is to confront your leftover baggage and overcome it and let go of it, handle your unfinished business, if you will, doesn't really make sense that someone like Michael would be stuck more like closer to our plane of existence, because of something he did, especially when he did something not nearly as awful as some of the things that Ben did. um, or Saeed even. There are characters present in the Flash Sideways state of existence that have done way worse things than Michael for way less justifiable reasons. Um, so yeah, that never gelled with me. Some people would say like, oh well, Michael is kind of lingering himself because he needs to resolve things with his son. Again, I my issue with that is that's literally what the Flash Sideways are for. Ben and Alex have a very similar thing where they kind of resolve that in the Flash Sideways in their own way. Um, he kind of redeems himself in regards to that relationship. Ben does. And somebody could say, well, yeah, but Alex died before Ben, and Ben's the one that needed to make it right. Whereas Michael died before Walt, and Walt's still alive, so that's why Michael hangs out, in the realm of the living, or whatever. Um, Again, my issue with that is the Flash Sideways exist outside of time. This is explicitly stated by Christian in basically the final scene of the series that there is no now here. That's why people that died before Jack are there now, and that's why people that died long after him are there now. So it's not like if Michael dies in the explosion, he would essentially, from his point of view, immediately be in the Flash Sideways, and Walt would already be there. So yeah, it just muddles the whole thing if you say that the Whispers are spirits. And frankly, I think that there's an alternative explanation that makes way more sense, and it even makes Michael leading Hurley to the Man in Black make sense. And I mean that is essentially that the Whispers are the sound of thoughts, memories, consciousness that are kind of generated when the Man in Black is projecting his consciousness or yeah, basically his consciousness away from his corporeal self. Um, and I've talked a lot about how there's a big difference between the Man in Black taking corporeal forms, which are 100% physically present and can be experienced by anybody, regardless of their mental state. There's a big difference between that, which he can only, oh, yeah, people tend to classify that as he can only uh, replicate the dead. I would say that nobody can survive. Like if you try to replicate a living person, um, they wouldn't survive that process because he's breaking down their very DNA, and because he can't kill certain people, namely candidates, he can't replicate them until they're dead because to replicate them while they're still alive would be to kill them. Sorry, I know this is stuff that I've said a lot, and that's perhaps an issue with these commentaries. Is I'm probably going to be repeating myself quite a bit, but since certain things will be relevant to more than one episode. Um, so, anyways, yeah. So if that's, I was saying that there's a big difference between that ability, him taking corporeal forms, and him being able to project illusions to the mentally vulnerable, people that are in susceptible mental states. And being asleep and being susceptible to those dreams is an example of that. But, when you have a character like Echo in season 3 who's dehydrated and wounded and exhausted, and he's seeing the memory of the altar boy and the memory of the men he killed off island, those aren't physically present. Those are things that the Man in Black is being able to um, project to Echo because of the mental state that he's in. Um, and there's all kinds of examples like that. Like Richard in the ship in season 6, he sees his dead wife. Jacob says that wasn't your wife. It almost certainly wasn't her because she tells the lie, the Man in Black's lie, that Richard's in hell. Why would Isabel lie about that? She wouldn't. Uh, so yeah, there's all kinds of examples of the Man in Black being able to do this, of projecting memories, but only if the person is in a mentally vulnerable state. Um, so, uh, so with that in mind, in season 6, it's established by Alana that the Man in Black can no longer change his corporeal form, that he's stuck in the form of Locke. But that has no bearing on his other ability of being able to project illusions to the mentally vulnerable. And so that's where I argue that the Michael we see in season 6 is actually sorry, is actually the Man in Black projecting that and delivering those messages, trying to get Hurley to bring the rest of the candidates to him. Because if you'll remember, prior to that, in the episode prior to that, Locke tried to recruit Sun. Sun ran away in fear, and she hit her head, and she loses her ability to speak English. And there's kind of some debate on whether or not the Man in Black did that, if I remember right. But the point is, since that didn't go very well, he's kind of out of options. And what we see in the Everybody Loves Hugo episode, the episode where Hurley is seeing Michael, what we see in the Man in Black's camp is the Man in Black is kind of just sitting there at the beginning of the day, and he's like cutting up that stick. And and Kate's asking what they're waiting on, and he's like, well, we're waiting on the rest of your friends to show up, because the only way we can leave is if we leave together. It doesn't seem very in character for the Man in Black to just be sitting around and waiting to see if that happens. And that's why, in my opinion, what we're actually seeing is him actively trying to bring them to him by projecting that image of Michael. Anyways, so I did end up going like way more in depth with that. Like I said, I wasn't going to, but if you want to check out the full video essay, like I said, I'll link that below. I think I do a really good job of making the full case and illustrating why each example of the whispers we hear in the series, why it makes sense for that to be the Man in Black. Like I said, in some cases, it's often when he's projecting his consciousness away from himself, but I do think he sometimes uses it intentionally to kind of distract or add an eeriness or kind of make whatever apparition we're seeing more intimidating, so that the person that he's presenting that to will buy into it more, or be, like I said, more intimidated by it. So yeah, trying to. So yeah, so I've talked about the dreams, I've talked about the whispers, and we know that the Man in Black can replicate, physical forms if he has access to their bodies. We know there's probably no shortage of dead boar on the island. So you take all these things together. What do I think is happening? The Man in Black is doing all of this to Sawyer. He's tormenting him with his past, and the next question would be, why would he be doing this to Sawyer now in particular, right? We know the Man in Black's big goal is to create tension and conflict that can result in violence, and in particular violence that could lead to the death of candidates. So how does doing this to Sawyer now help him pursue that goal? And in my opinion, we get that answer in this very episode at the beginning, when it's established that Sawyer has a loaded gun and he's not giving it back to Jack. So at this stage in Sawyer's arc, Sawyer's a very temperamental guy, and I think that the Man in Black antagonizing him the way that he is, the goal is to kind of like make him more and more irritable, push him over to the edge, get it in this state of mind where if anybody gets in some kind of confrontation with him, it's that much more likely to go south. So yeah, that's kind of how I read this episode in the context of the entire series. And in my opinion, that's one of the things I love about it, is it's one of the episodes that gives some very big clues as to what exactly is going on here on this island. It's kind of a more isolated demonstration of what the Man in Black's series-long goals are. What he's doing across the entire series. We get kind of like I said, a more isolated example of that in just this episode. All right, so yeah, I've got some comments. I was going to try and address the comments today as the scenes were playing out, but while I was rambling about all of that, we did pass one of them. and we are currently in the next one. Well, so let me just go ahead and do, because yeah, let me go ahead and do the one that's on screen now, which is the I never seen. Um, so Time Gentleman said he was responding to our main podcast episode on Outlaws, and basically in that I asked Flickerson if he kind of fell. There's a moment at the end of this I Never game where Sawyer says, "I never killed a man," and I was asking Flickerson if he bought that for a moment. Um, Apparently, the way that I phrased it and the way that we kind of moved on, um, I guess it came across as though I was suggesting that you were supposed to, like, even at the very end of that scene, you were supposed to have the, or be under the impression that Sawyer didn't kill the guy. So yeah, that's what Time Gentleman's saying here. So I'm going to read this first part, and then I'm going to read this last part. So yeah, the first part. Not sure if I read you correctly, but I think you said that because during the I Never game, Sawyer says, "I never killed a man," he is telling Kate that he never killed a man. I don't think that's the case. It seems Sawyer is playing by the rule that saying "I have never done X" doesn't mean you haven't done it. It's whether you drink afterwards that clarifies that. Yeah, so I, first of all, completely agree, and that's always been my interpretation of the scene. I was explicitly referring to, because by this point in the game, every "I never" statement uh, has been true by both people making the statement. That's the first one where uh, he drinks after the fact. So in that moment, and I do think that is what the writers intended, you could be misled into thinking like, oh, well, there you go, he doesn't go through with it, I guess, only to then have the turnaround of like, oh, well, never mind, he just drank, so I guess that means he does go through with it. So I was strictly referring to those, 30 seconds or so where it's not clear. Or where it's suggested that he didn't go through with it before that reveal. But anyways, what Time Gentleman says at the end of this, I thought was really well put. So that's why I'm reading the comment. All this to say, I don't think that technically there's really a moment where the viewer should think, oh, he said he never killed a man, so maybe he didn't go through it in Australia, outside of the very brief pause between Kate's drink and his drink. Agreed. Regardless, it's a great scene and a great moment. Sawyer is not only sniffing out Kate being the convict, he's also getting a jab in after her comments about the boar in the letter, and bonding with her by pointing out how they've got a bit more of the same darkness in them than, say, squeaky clean Doc Shepard, and doing his usual self-sabotage to make sure she doesn't think too highly of him. So much going on in that one moment. Yes, I completely agree, and yeah, like we've talked about in the group discussion and in the main podcast episode, I really love that scene. Yeah, it's really well written, and just the steady, it starts off flirty and fun, and just the way that they each kind of steadily get more and more offended, and they keep taking deeper and deeper jabs until it culminates in that moment. Yeah, it's so very good. Okay, so now we're at the part where Locke is showing up to the camp after the boar, has done what it's done to Sawyer's stuff. And Sawyer woke up from another dream. So, yeah, that brings me to this comment from Lucas43434, who says, "It's hard to say whether or not Locke believed the dog was his sister. He is desperate to find..." Sorry, I should real quick. Lucas is responding to, in the group discussion, it came up whether or not Locke believed that story. Because he gives the response to Kate. When Kate asks, "So you're saying the dog was your sister?" And he says, "That would be silly, but my mom thought it was." So yeah, in the group discussion, I kind of talked about how I that it's obviously open to interpretation. Um, and I tend to think along the lines of, at the time he didn't believe it was his sister. And I cited Locke telling Jack that he's a meat and potatoes kind of guy, not a big believer in magic. But this place is different, and that almost suggests that it's the island that gets Locke to start believing in like a more supernatural spin on things. Anyway, so that's what Lucas is referring to. It's hard to say whether or not Locke believed that the dog was his sister. He is desperate to find meaning in everything, quick to believe, but also prone to losing faith. He is devastated whenever his faith is shaken. I would guess that he has gone back and forth many times on whether or not his foster mother was right in her belief. At this particular point in his life, I think Locke is very likely to believe. Yeah, I would agree with that last part too. I would say he probably. It's not super important. It is very subjective and open to interpretation. In my head, I don't imagine him going back and forth on it, because I don't imagine he really thought about it that much over the rest of his life. But yeah, I would agree that he probably is more likely to believe it in the moment that he's telling the story, and he's just saying that to Kate. Well, okay, but let's get down to it, because I almost wish we hadn't got into it as deeply as we did in the group discussion, because it's kind of irrelevant what Locke believes. His point in telling the story isn't to tell them like, "Hey, this happened. My sister came back." His whole point when he says, "Well, that would be silly," and there's the pause, and he says, "But my mother believed it was." That's the point. That's what's important. It doesn't matter what anybody else believed. It doesn't matter if it was true or not. What matters is that the mother believed it. And that's what matters in the situation with the boar. Sawyer believes that this boar has it out for him. Like, why would the boar have it out for him? What does it mean that he's hearing this voice in the whispers? And so, yeah, what's important, regardless of whether or not it's true, is that Sawyer is interpreting this boar to be the man that he killed. And we know that know is a strong word. If you subscribe to my interpretation that this is the Man in Black, in that case, we know that it's not that man. But what's important is that Sawyer has that interpretation of it, and that he has that belief, and that's what gives meaning to his decision not to kill the boar, to not take vengeance this time, and to let it go. So yeah, it's completely up to interpretation. I don't even have that strong of an opinion. The way it came up in the first time viewer discussion, the way it came up, for whatever reason, I felt inclined to share that like I don't even think he necessarily believed it. We kind of focused in on that, but my point in saying that I don't think he necessarily believed it, my point is that wasn't the point of the story, whether or not he believed it. He didn't need to believe that was what had happened, that his sister had come back. He doesn't need to have believed that that's what was happening in order for him to feel that he should tell that story to Sawyer. So yeah. Okay, well, so moving on, because now we're in another scene. Man. So a comment from Homo sapiens 97, I believe is how I'm supposed to say that. Homo sapiens, that's what I had decided. I'm just going to say Homo sapiens from now on. So right now we're in the scene where Sawyer's at the shrimp truck for the first time. And he's struggling to go through with it, and the man asks what Sawyer's name is. And there's like a brief pause on Sawyer's part before he says James. So yeah, Homo sapiens said in response to the first time viewer discussion, he said, "Did nobody notice that we finally found out Sawyer's name in this episode?" No, and I went back and forth on whether or not to mention this in either the main podcast episode or the first time viewer discussion, because what I think is interesting about a first time viewer watching this is that isn't necessarily a reveal of Sawyer's real name. We don't know what his real name is in this episode, so when This guy, when Frank Duckett asks what his name is, he can't say Sawyer because he thinks this is the actual Sawyer, and that would be too weird. Um, so we, as the audience, don't know if he's coming up with a fake name in that moment. There's that brief pause, and he says James, and so one way to read that is that he just made up a name. He just yeah pulled a name out of his ass. But so the reason I didn't bring that up in the main podcast episode or in the first time viewer discussion, I think to draw attention to it myself instead of seeing if somebody else brought it up. For me to point out that he said his name was James would almost spoil that there's something significant about him saying that name. It would kind of reveal that he didn't just make up a name. Whereas now, when it's revealed in the finale that his name is actually James Ford, that kind of retroactively reveals that he gave the guy his real name. And that's where that's interesting, and that's where I intend to point out to Flickerson and the first-time viewers, like, hey, guess what? That means that he said his real name to the guy. It isn't that interesting. And yeah, to me, it's just like he's so in his head and nervous and wrestling with what he's doing that he can't even come up with a fake name in that moment. And he just surrenders his real name. And yeah, so I just that's why I didn't bring it up. Is because for a first time viewer, I don't think that it's accurate to classify that as a reveal of his real name. In my opinion, it's the finale that reveals his real name and retroactively reveals that he was telling the truth in that moment. And you could maybe have a deeper interpretation of him giving the real name too. Like I said, I kind of take it as like he couldn't be bothered to think of a fake name in that moment, but you could maybe interpret that differently. That he's confronting this man that he thinks ruins his life, and he wants him to know his real name. I think it would be fair to read it that way too. So now finally circling back to the comment where I missed the part that was on the screen. I think, where's it at? Sorry. Okay, this one is also from Homo Sapiens, and he said, "I would love to hear your thoughts about Ethan's corpse visibly breathing. Is it just a production error, or are we supposed to infer something from it? Especially considering that Hurley and Charlie talk about Ethan rising from the dead." Yeah, so my take on this is the less interesting, less fun one, which is that, it's just a production error. My reason for feeling that way, because it doesn't go anywhere, right? And in the context of the completed series, it doesn't make sense. Like there's no sensible reason for Ethan to be breathing again. It was pretty clear that he was very dead at the end of the last episode. So it doesn't make sense for the Man in Black to have infected him and for him to be breathing. And when Saeed comes back in the final season, and I've made the case for why I don't think he was ever completely dead either. Dogen doesn't check Saeed's pulse or anything like that. Nobody does. What Dogen does is he kind of passes his hand over Saeed's face and chest. It's like he's trying to sense something, and I think that he's trying to sense Jacob's life force because there's a bit of Jacob's life force in all of the candidates, and because as part of the infection process, the Man in Black allows that part to die and only brings back the infected person from the brink of death. Basically Dogen passes his hand over, doesn't sense Jacob's life force, and then it's just like, okay, yeah, he's dead. Anyways, I think Saeed was incredibly close to death, but then he comes back and he's infected. It doesn't make sense to me that that's what happened with Ethan, and from a storytelling perspective, to read it that way which again I think is the only thing that would even kind of make sense for why Ethan would be breathing. Um, I guess what I'm trying to say is I can so with other production errors, right? Like you've got scenes where you can see like a farm fence in the background, like on the island. So it's like in Hawaii, there's this fence, and you see it in the background of the shot, and if you don't notice it, I oftentimes don't until it's pointed out to me, um, then great. Then it doesn't break the illusion. If you do notice it, then yeah, or in most cases you realize that you're meant to write that off as just a mistake, and you're meant to ignore it, and you're meant to just pretend it's not there. Um, that's how I feel about the Ethan breathing scene. For the longest time, I didn't notice it, and it wasn't until I read it somewhere that where somebody was pointing it out that I finally noticed it. Because yeah, it is very much at the forefront of the screen, but the focus of the shot is, I mean, again, in my opinion, uh, Hurley and Charlie, and yeah, I mean, the body's there and the hands there, and it's meant to be like, okay, yeah, it's this morbid thing that they're doing because of this morbid thing that Charlie did, and that's what he's struggling with this whole episode. Um, yeah, a lot of people seem to notice it, but uh, again, what I'm trying to say is, from a storytelling perspective, I can forgive that error, like that being an error, more so than I can forgive the if I interpreted it as, oh, he was really alive at that point, and then that just never gets addressed. That would be the bigger sin on the story's part, if that makes sense. Like to me, the bigger sin would be that Ethan was alive somehow, and it's never addressed or explained in any way. That's the bigger sin than, oh, it was just a production error. Like whoever was the stand-in for the body was really hot under that tarp, and they were breathing, and for whatever reason nobody on set caught it, and then by the time they ended up in the editing bay, they didn't have any other usable takes, so they just had to accept that that's what was happening there, and hope that not too many people noticed it, or that it didn't bother too many people. So yeah, like I said, that's probably the less fun. I'm sure other people could come up with some crazy theories, and whatnot, and yeah, but for me, I just, yeah, he's not breathing. The character's not breathing. Yeah. So and it's just a mistake. So yeah, I think that's all the comments for this time, which is good. Lately I've been running over, which is fine, but feels good to be more or less on pace with the episode this time. Of course, now I've got to try and come up with more stuff to talk about. I did like in the first time viewer discussion how everyone was convinced that Sawyer wasn't actually going to kill the dude. And then yeah, he does, and it's uh, yeah, like Drew, the first time viewer, Drew, was expecting there to be some kind of twist, like oh, Sawyer didn't go through with it, but he somehow caused the death. And then he was right to expect the twist, but the twist was that it was the wrong guy, not that Sawyer didn't actually murder a person. Um, and that's what I kind of like, because Drew specifically, I know, is like pretty much every episode he's looking for some kind of twist, and he's trying to catch the twist before it's revealed, um, which is cool. I mean, I hope it's not distracting him too much from just experiencing the episode, but what I enjoy about it is that for the most part the show's still able to surprise him, even though he is on the lookout for these things. And so yeah, just now we had the scene where Sawyer doesn't shoot the boar. He stares it down, looks it in the eyes, doesn't do it, and yeah, that's a victory for Sawyer. Especially through the lens of this is the Man in Black trying to push Sawyer down his more or push him towards his more murderous side. Now we know that that guy in Australia was wrong. Well, I mean, the guy in Australia was just saying he might not be a killer. Um, but this episode establishes actually he is. Sawyer is a killer. Um, so yeah, for that to be revealed in the moment, and then, like I said, according to the Man in Black interpretation, that's what the Man in Black wants is to push him further down that path, like toward that side of himself. Um, and so for Sawyer to not give in to that, it is presented as a victory the first time you watch this episode, but I think interpreting it as the Men in Black on a rewatch, it adds to that. It's an even bigger victory than it first seemed to be. Um, yeah, and so now we have the scene where Sawyer's bringing the gun back to Jack. There was a point that I think Drew, the cosplayer, the one that has seen the show before, was trying to make in the group discussion that kind of got glossed over. And I will say that is something that happens a lot, not just with Drew. A lot of times, like I'll fail to appreciate what somebody's trying to say in the room, but then when I'm editing, I'll kind of catch what they're saying. And because in the moment in the group discussion, there's like multiple people talking at once sometimes, and it's easy to like focus in on what one person is saying, or yeah, just sometimes there's not enough time to think about what's being said. Um, for example, when I told them that the next week's episode is called In Translation, and I kind of expected that everybody was going to guess Jen. And then Will guessed Shannon, and I remember being like confused as to why he guessed that. Um, but then on editing it, or not even editing, I think I was just thinking about it later. I was like, actually, that's a good guess. Like he was guessing that because A, Shannon is one of the people I said hasn't had a flashback episode yet, but B, she was translating the French to English. So me having seen this series so many times, like in translation, I'm like, oh, that's obviously referring to the Korean couple. And since Jin is the one that hasn't had a flashback episode, it's probably referring to him. Um, and I never even considered how knowing that title before watching the episode could be interpreted as, oh, this might be a Shannon episode. So yeah, I failed to appreciate in the moment that Will made that guess how good of a guess it was. Um, but anyways, getting back to the point that Drew, the cosplayer, what was making, uh, he was talking about the Red Sox will never win the series comment, and I pointed out that if we assume that this is taking place at the same time, like if the plane crashed on the day that the at the same time that the pilot premiered, which anybody that has seen the show in its entirety knows is the case. If we assume that's true, then by the time the plane crashed, the Red Sox hadn't won the series, and obviously the fact that that's something that was being said suggests that um, to be the case. So, uh, I was pointing that out, and then I pointed out that it was actually that fall, the fall of 2004, that the Red Sox did finally win the series, and they broke the Bambino curse. Um, and then yeah, Drew had made a comment about like because this episode would have been written and filmed and made after that happened in real life. Like in the story, the characters don't know that they've won the series, and actually, I'm not quite clear on if they had yet at this point in the show. Regardless, if it had already happened, obviously them being stuck on the island, they wouldn't know that. But on the in the real world in the writing phase, when they first wrote that line for Christian to be saying, they know that that the Red Sox had then finally won the series. And so, if Christian has that expression, he's saying that in regards to his idea of fate. Like, it's just fate. Some people are meant to suffer. It's why the Red Sox will never win the series. Drew made the comment, which was, maybe that in and of itself was a commentary on fate from the writers, specifically Christian's perspective on fate. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a really, really good point. Is that Christian, especially when you take it and you apply it to in a couple episodes, Hurley's perspective of the numbers and how they're cursed. If you take what they're saying about Christians' belief that some people are just cursed, basically, right? Like the Red Sox are cursed. I'm cursed. It's a curse. I surrender to it. It's just fate. And as Jack says, like he'd rather say that than accept responsibility. So yeah, so the fact that they wrote that line after the Red Sox had won the series is almost them saying, yeah, Christian, his whole philosophy here is bullshit. And Jack is essentially right. Like, he's blaming it on some curse. He's blaming it on fate, but it's just an excuse to not take responsibility. And I think that's, like I said, I think that's interesting to apply to Hurley's interpretation of the numbers and his luck. The Red Sox and the Red Sox fans for however many years, quite a lot, believed they were cursed. But the fact that they did win would suggest that's not true. Or if for those that are committed to it, you believe that they somehow broke the curse. Yeah. So anyways, like I said, I failed to appreciate what he was getting at in the moment that he said that. But on the edit, I was like, oh yeah, that might have been good to talk about. But okay, so yeah, we're once again long past the credits, so I am going to do my own credits real quick. Thank you to candidate number 90, Ben Ward. Candidate 108, Jeffrey Winslow. Candidate 69, Brian Phillips. Candidate 32, Chuck Boyd. And candidate 341, Hans. I'd also like to thank the multiple people that have donated equipment and resources used in the production of this podcast. And those include Mary Mullins, Brandon Huth, Charles Huth, William McMinn, and Charlene McMinn. And yeah, I think that's everything I've got for this one. I will be back with the full series spoiler edition for In Translation in about a week. Between now and then, you will see our main podcast episode on In Translation and our first time viewer discussion of In Translation. And yeah, I hope you guys come back for any and all of that. But until then, as always, namaste and good luck.